They say you are what you experience. This certainly rings true when considering one of the most prolific serial killers in the world. Born in war-torn Colombia, Pedro Lopez was forced to fend for himself at the age of 8. His spirit would be broken and warped by years of starvation, addiction, violence and abuse. By the time he was an adult, he was full of rage, a rage he would direct towards innocent young girls, whom he would abduct, abuse and murder before burying their remains. Lopez was charged with 110 murders and claimed he'd murdered as many as 300 girls spanning over 3 countries. So horrific and prolific were his crimes that he became known as the Monster of the Andes. You would assume a killer of this magnitude would be locked away permanently, but Lopez's current whereabouts remain unknown to this day. This is the portrait of Pedro Lopez, also known as the Monster of the Andes. Welcome to Portrait of a Serial Killer. Before I start, I want to give you a quick disclaimer. I won't go into all the gory details, but it could still be upsetting for some. If that's you, please keep yourself safe and click out of the video. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. In this episode, the following topics will be discussed: the abuse and murder of children, sexual abuse, murder and mental health. Okay, let's begin. Pedro Lopez was born on October the 8th, 1948, to the parents of Dario and Benilda Reyes in Santa Isabel, Colombia. Unfortunately, Lopez never met his father, who was killed months before he was born in La Violencia, a civil war that had just begun and would continue for the next 10 years. It would claim the lives of 250,000 people, plunge Colombia into extreme poverty, and cause the highest crime rate of any country at the time. Benilda, Lopez's mother, was a sex worker. Pedro was the 7th born out of 13 children, each fathered by different clients. Benilda described her son as a polite boy who wanted to become a teacher. The family lived in poverty and would often go without food. They all lived in just one room. His mother would carry out her sex work in this room with only a curtain to shield the view from her children. As a result, Lopez would often overhear his mother being used for sex. On some occasions, she would be assaulted by clients and her children would listen, waiting for it to be over. Lopez has said that his mother was abusive towards him and his siblings and would often beat him. At the age of 8, Lopez claims his mother kicked him out after she caught him molesting his younger sister. Benilda, however, claimed that he left of his own accord and that she'd gone looking for him. We will never know the truth for sure, but it is likely that Lopez could begin to associate sex with women in his family given his daily exposure to his mother's sex work. Regardless, at the age of 8, Lopez was homeless and on his own in war-torn Colombia. He would combat starvation by searching through trash or begging for money. The nights, while not cold, were a little comfort to a vulnerable child who slept in the refuge of the city plagued by rats. One day, Lopez is approached by a stranger who offered him shelter and a hot meal. Lopez is weary but starving, so he accepts the man's offer. Unfortunately, the man leads him into an abandoned building where he sexually abuses Lopez. The traumatic event left Lopez terrified, so much so that he would only venture out to find food at night time in an attempt to avoid further conflict. Lopez eventually made the 90-mile trek to the capital city of Bogota, which was considered a refuge from the civil war that was raging on in the countryside. Upon arrival, Lopez becomes one of the 1,000 homeless children left to fend for themselves in the slums of the city known as Las Camenes. Eventually, he joined a gang of street children which operated as a network of thieves who often had to defend their patch from other children in street gangs. These turf battles would be violent, occasionally resulting in the murder of children by other children. Child prostitution was common, and street children would need to keep their eye out for those who would abduct them to use them as sex workers or slaves. Lopez began to smoke bazuco, an impure form of cocaine. Bazuco is derived from the Spanish word for trash. It is basically a paste made from the leftover byproduct of the cocaine making process. It usually contains kerosene, methanol, and other nasty chemicals used in the process. It's close to crack in how it affects users, and just like crack, it doesn't last long, so it's more addictive than regular cocaine. Users will often lace their cigarettes with the paste and smoke it that way. It's a stimulant drug, and overuse can lead to drug psychosis. That is when a person experiences delusions or hallucinations because of the drug they're using. At age 10, an elderly American couple took pity on the malnourished Lopez and convinced Lopez to live with them after slowly building up trust. They enroll him at a school for orphans, and everything seems to be changing for the better. Lopez has a foster mum and dad, food in his belly, a roof over his head. He's kicked his bazooka addiction and was getting an education. This would go on for 2 years, but unfortunately it didn't last. Lopez claims that at the age of 12, a male teacher at the school started to sexually abuse him. This caused the young Lopez to flee to the streets, a tough but familiar place where he felt more in control. Lopez would later explain to officials that this repeated abuse as a child made him angry and vengeful. He returned to gang life and smoking bazuco, gradually building a reputation with his peers. He progressed to stealing cars to survive. This resulted in him eventually, at the age of 21, being arrested in 1969 for grand theft auto, where he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Not long after his incarceration, Lopez was gang raped by 4 other inmates. A traumatized Lopez became enraged. He remembered the faces of each of the prisoners who attacked him. With a makeshift knife in his hand, he hunts them down one by one and manages to kill 3 out of the 4, leaving the surviving inmates severely injured. Lopez enjoys his revenge and the feeling of taking a life. Surprisingly, the Colombian Justice Department viewed Lopez murdering inmates as an act of self-defense, and so he was only sentenced to an extra 2 years imprisonment. This act of violence earned Lopez respect from the other inmates. He was viewed as a loose cannon and definitely not someone you wanted to mess with. He was often seen ranting and muttering indistinguishably to himself. He passed the time by smoking bazuco and flicking through porn magazines. At this stage, Lopez reports that his sexual desires had become conflicted. He still had a sex drive, but the women in the magazines repulsed him and reminded him of his abusive mother, so his sexual fantasies became more sadistic in nature. He wanted to abuse the women in the same way that he had been abused. Lopez was released from prison in 1978, and this is when his murder spree began. He had developed a taste for killing and enjoyed the sense of control it gave him. He is full of anger, and because of the sexual abuse he had been subjected to, he makes a conscious decision to take this anger out on young, innocent girls. Lopez lives his life as a nomad, wandering through Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Wherever he goes, he leaves the bodies of innocent girls who unfortunately cross his path. Lopez would tell authorities that he would target indigenous girls who came from poor families. These girls were easier to abduct without drawing too much attention. He would hunt for girls he perceived as being good and innocent. These would be girls he would see helping their mothers with chores or looking after their siblings. He would approach these girls claiming to be lost or helpless, or gain their trust by offering them gifts. He would then lure them away from the populated areas. Once isolated, Lopez would sexually assault them and then spend the night sleeping beside them, promising to release them in the morning. At dawn, he would sexually assault them again before strangling them to death. He would do this at dawn because it enabled him to look into their eyes as he watched the life drain out of them. Once he grew bored of talking to the dead bodies, he would bury the remains in a shallow grave before moving on to his next victim. The authorities were still trying to recover from the chaos of the Civil War. They were thinly spread and often corrupt, so the report of a missing street child was low on their list. Lopez knew that it would be a different story if he took a daughter from a wealthy or white family. As a result, Lopez could do pretty much as he pleased without any repercussions from authorities for quite some time. In Peru, Lopez got caught by an Ayacucho tribe when he tried to abduct a 9-year-old girl belonging to their community. The tribe had already noticed that some of their young girls had gone missing. Suspecting Lopez as the culprit, they punished him in accordance with their tribal laws by burying him in the ground, feet first, up to his neck, so only his head was visible. They were about to pour syrup on his head and leave him to be eaten alive by ants when an American missionary intervened and convinced the locals to hand him over so that they could deliver him to the Peruvian police. I'm unsure of what happens next because some of the sources I found contradicted others. So, either the missionary released Lopez at the Colombian border, or the missionary took him to the police who, upon finding out he was Colombian and having no evidence to charge him with anything, opted to deport him back to Colombia. Either way, Lopez was set free in Colombia to continue with his murder spree. Lopez continued to travel through Colombia and Ecuador, abducting, sexually assaulting and killing girls as he went. Sex trafficking and slavery are illegal but commonplace, so people simply assume the gangs have kidnapped their missing girls with the view to exploit them for money. There were too many missing to think it was just one sole person murdering them all. In 1980, during a flash flood, a river near Ambato in Ecuador uncovered the remains of 4 girls who had been reported missing. At this stage, the police and the public were aware that they were dealing with a serial killer, and the city was on high alert. Within days of this discovery, the mother of a 12-year-old noticed Lopez trying to abduct her daughter in the marketplace. She raises the alarm by shouting out, and a mob of angry citizens quickly form. They catch Lopez and manhandle him before taking him to the police on suspicion of being the child murderer plaguing their city. He was arrested and detained by Ecuadorian police. Initially, Lopez was not cooperating. When the police learnt that Lopez was a Colombian in Ecuador without a visa, they began to beat and torture him in the hopes of gaining a confession, with no success. The police realised that violence would not work, so they tried a different approach to get Lopez to talk. They send in a police officer called Pastor Cordova into Lopez's cell undercover as a fellow inmate. Eventually, Cordova won Lopez's trust, and he began to disclose his horrendous crimes. Cordova would spend a month listening to Lopez describe the brutal murders of young girls and fearing that Lopez would kill him in his sleep before he banged on the cell door begging to be released. Following this, Lopez began to cooperate with police, who provided him with cigarettes and food to keep him talking. Lopez continued to confess, claiming to have killed 110 girls in Ecuador between April 1979 and March 1980. The number is so vast that the police begin to suspect that Lopez is a delusional madman who's making this all up. They ask, and Lopez agrees to take them to the bodies of his victims. Lopez was able to take police to 57 bodies out of the 110 girls he confessed to killing. The victims were aged 8 to 12 years old. Lopez showed no signs of remorse when the bodies were uncovered or identified by their parents. Sometimes he led police to places, but after digging, nothing was found. It is believed that Lopez may have forgotten, or that the weather and animals had moved the bodies over time. Lopez was charged with 110 murders in total. This took into account the bodies they were able to uncover, as well as the detailed confessions he provided. Lopez claimed that he killed 200 more girls in the neighbouring countries of Peru and Colombia over a 7-year period. On July 31st, 1981, the then 33-year-old Lopez was given the harshest sentence available in Ecuadorian law, which was only 16 years. He was sent to prison where he received the diagnosis of a sociopath. He was released 2 years early for good behaviour. On the 31st of August 1994, Pedro Lopez was released and deported back to Colombia, where he was suspected of another murder. It was believed that he would face the firing squad as a result. Lopez was charged with the murder upon arrival and held in custody awaiting trial. Unfortunately, he was deemed insane and therefore unfit for trial. This resulted in him being placed in the psychiatric wing of Bogotá Hospital. In 1998, he was declared sane and released under the condition that he would continue to attend therapy sessions and check in with authorities every month. Lopez absconded as soon as he was released from hospital. His mother, Benilda, reported that he visited her, she thought, to come and kill her, but instead he demanded his inheritance early. When she told him that she had no money, Lopez took her only chair and bed and began trying to sell them to passers-by. Once he was successful, he left with the money, and that was the last time she ever saw her son. The last time Lopez was ever seen was on September the 22nd, 1999, at the National Registry of Bogotá to claim his new citizenship card. In 2002, the Colombian government launched an Interpol order of arrest against Lopez as he'd been charged with an additional murder. As of today, his location is unknown and authorities are unsure if he is dead or alive. If he is alive, he would be 75 years old. After researching this murder, I feel a lot more grateful for the UK police and legal system. I can't get my head around how this case ended up. It just defies logic. Surely you can't have the strength to keep murdering at 75. One can hope anyway. That's all I've got for this one. I'll see you in the next. Thanks for watching. If you got something out of this episode, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more episodes, make sure you click the subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. But that's it for now. I'll catch you in the next one.